could be interesting to look at hearing in a good amount of years from now, maybe 10 years from now, is that it becomes more like an area of biohacking, or becomes more an area of self-optimization. That is like, why wouldn't you help yourself hear better, so you're like, working even better with the environment around you? Had this survey where they found that 71% would be extremely likely or very likely to act on their hearing loss if they knew that it was relating to these different aspects of your health.
Welcome, everybody. This is Resonate the podcast, and I'm your host, Lesleigh Smith. This is where wisdom, human stories, and science all come together to meet. Now, in episode 1, we introduced a simple but powerful idea that hearing isn't just about ears. It's the gateway to how we connect, how we think, how we remember, even how we sleep and show up in the world. And today we're digging a bit deeper into that idea, and we're looking at the brain itself. And we're going to be answering the main question: if we address our hearing, can this have a positive impact on our memory? So what can we actually do about it? Because if hearing is the gateway, then cognition, memory, attention, meaningful connection with other people is what happens on the other side of that door. My guest today sits right at the intersection of hearing, brain health, technology, and research. Dr. Sigart Brant is a medical doctor, and he's the director and head at BrainWorks at GN Group. And this is a global enterprise based in Denmark. Now, BrainWorks is an initiative focused on understanding the relationship between hearing health and cognitive health. And most importantly, from my perspective, what can we actually do about it? Sigart works across healthcare, research, innovation, and policy, connecting the dots between science and real-world outcomes for patients. Sigart, very welcome. Welcome to Resonate the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
It's great having you here. Let's start the conversation kind of big picture, shall we? We've traditionally, in audiology, we've traditionally treated hearing as something completely separate from brain health, almost mechanical, if you will. Your hearing is down at these pitches. Let's turn the volume up at the same pitches, and therefore, you get back to baseline. In your opinion, why is that way of thinking outdated now?
I think it's just because we have so much knowledge now of how hearing loss is connected to your overall health, that it's really hard to deny the fact that when you treat your hearing loss, you also do something for your overall health, and vice versa. I think we need to pay attention to all the ways that we are affected across our, health, and I would say lifespan in our older age, to say that it means it makes sense to take care of our hearing, but also because of all the benefits that comes with it.
Right. And you mentioned all the benefits. So what are some of the benefits that would come from improving your hearing? I mean, the obvious one is I can hear louder, but what other benefits?
It's well, first and foremost, it's a big question, but I'll try and keep it short, and we can always dive into some of the different areas.
Yeah.
Now, Leslie, in the beginning, you mentioned that we're focusing on cognitive health and brain health.
That's right.
And that has most definitely been one of our key areas. And you could say throughout the, I want to say since 2011, a lot of evidence has been mounting showing that there's an increased risk between, cognitive health and hearing loss, and that by having a hearing loss, you might be at an increased risk of developing some cognitive conditions. It's incredibly important to say here that when we talk about these topics, there are still research areas that are being developed. So it's not like we all have the silver bullet and saying like, this is what we know for sure. But what we can say is that there's so much evidence pointing in the same direction that it seems to be a risk factor to have a hearing loss. So in that cognitive space, if you imagine that that you spend extra resources in trying to hear if you're in noisy spaces, the benefit vice versa is that if you can hear better, well, you free up those kind of resources. And that could be aiding you in participating in conversation, being able to actually be more present when you're at a dinner party, for instance. So it's these kinds of benefits which would extend beyond being able to hear better when you leave, let's say, an office and you've gotten hearing aids fitted, but also extends in the idea that some of your resilience, some of your cognitive resilience is actually seems to be improved when you get hearing aids. So that is how we can see that it starts to actually alleviate some of the burden that a hearing loss gives. And that's just in the cognitive space. We can also look across, balance issues. We can look across some of the, feeling of social isolation and those areas where we also know that it has a great impact, and vice versa, a really, really big benefit if you're able to hear better and participate better and feel like you're not any more alone with the condition that you would have with a hearing loss, where you might feel, secluded.
Yeah, I agree with all of those things. So for the conversation today, let's focus on the cognitive side of things. But just going back to that, so you mentioned resources. So the way I kind of look at it is you sort of wake up in the morning and you have, let's say, a metaphorical bucket of resources, your energy, your attention span, like all of the things that you start with in the day, and then over the day, is it fair to say, kind of in layman's terms, if I was struggling to hear you, if there were certain sounds I couldn't hear, so let's just say hypothetically I can't hear the consonants, the beginnings and ends of the words as you're talking. So if I'm using my bucket of resources to understand what you're saying and kind of trying to, in my head, decode the message. So, you've said something, but I've missed the ending. So I'm trying to go, did you say cat? Did you say hat? Did you say sat? And try to percolate that I'm using up that bucket of resources and there's less left over to be able to pay attention to you or to remember that message. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely. I mean, it's if anyone's listening to this podcast and they're thinking like, oh man, if I'm at a really, really noisy dinner party and I come home, I'm exhausted. I mean, I'm so tired, and maybe at the last hour or so, I've just sat there and zoned out because couldn't bother anymore.
Yeah.
That feeling that you're sitting with is exactly what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
It's this feeling of trying to make sense of what's being said rather than trying to figure out like, what your take is actually on what's being said, or you're thinking about being able to respond, engage in conversation as you normally would.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes secondhand to just simply trying to understand what's being said. And those are the resources that are being sort of reallocated from the natural interaction you would have to just simply trying to cope. And we only have so many resources we can pull from.
Mm-hmm.
And they could also vary day by day, right? Sometimes we're not at our optimal or at our best, then we're a bit more prone. Other times we might have, more resources, but there will still be sort of the level of resilience that is getting challenged.
Okay. I like that concept of resilience. So basically hearing it isn't just mechanical, as we said at the beginning. It's engaging an active cognitive process that's more than just hearing. It's listening and understanding and remembering, maybe, and paying attention. So, okay. Would you mind just talking a little bit more? You mentioned that if your hearing loss goes unaddressed, that you're at higher risk of maybe cognitive decline or dementia. Would you mind just talking a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Maybe the best place to start is we had in 2020 a research paper came out from the Lancet, which is one of the most prestigious medical journals of the world, essentially. And they were looking at potentially modifiable risk factors for dementia. And what they did was they actually tried to look at, if we look at a population level, and we were able to eradicate any one of these different risk factors, then we would maybe be able to reduce the number of cases or number of people with dementia.
Wow.
And hearing loss appeared as one of them, and actually appeared as was one of the biggest factors. And you could say, well, in this case, what's important to remember is it's also because hearing loss is quite prevalent. We all know someone at an elderly age where they have some level of a hearing loss, and we might even have. I mean, I might suspect that I have a level of hearing loss, and I'm in my mid to late 30s, right? So it's pretty common. But the fact was that if we could do something about that and eradicate hearing loss, we could also reduce the number of dementia cases. That's what they deduced from all the research that was done up until 2020. Then in 2024, they revised it and put 2 more risk factors on it. So now we have 14.
Wow.
14 different potentially modifiable risk factors.
Okay.
While I know that it, by the face of it, can come across quite complex, maybe that you have to consider 14 different risk factors and how they interplay. But the way I like to look at it is we all have different levels. Like it's kind of knobs you can twist and turn a little bit, right? Because some of the other ones are if you, for instance, have diabetes, if you have increased cholesterol, if you're maybe a little bit more prone to depression, and if some level of obesity as well. Like there are different risk factors, and you can try and look them up if you're interested. But what it actually showcases is that we're all at some level on that spectrum of different risk factors. And the more of them that you have, you might be at increased risk of developing dementia. But it actually also comes with a very positive message in my head that even though we have dementia as a very serious, as like by good means, like a very serious word and condition, it's actually starting to paint the picture that we can do something about it. And now when you ask like this correlation, now of course that's putting up the idea that if we could treat hearing loss, do something about it, then we would reduce the number of cases. But if we look at an individual level, we actually also had a study that was done in 2023 by Dr. Frank Lin. It was called the ACHIEVE study, where it was the first randomized controlled trial where they used a hearing aid as an intervention to see how cognition basically fared over a period of 3 years. And now, if you remember the idea of the different risk factors and all of us being sort of at a different level of a risk,
yes,
they basically found the same idea that if you had an increased risk of developing dementia, then hearing aids actually reduced the speed with which your cognitive decline happened by 48%.
Wow. That's
yeah,
significant.
So it's quite significant.
Yeah.
And now when I say randomized controlled trial, it's it might sound a little bit gibberish if you're not within sort of the field of it, but what it essentially means is that you take 2 groups that look very much alike, and then you try to take one single thing that can distinguish the 2 groups, which is a hearing aid or no hearing aid. And that means that you should have that as the only thing that basically differs. So we can, sort of ascribe that the results are down to actually using a hearing aid as an intervention. That's what we normally do also when we test different kinds of drugs in the pharmaceutical world and whatnot, where we want to find out if there's an effect or not. And there actually was here in people at increased risk. One thing to keep in mind though here, and that's also things that have been brought up around the study, that if you look at the full population, they actually didn't see an effect. And that's where the devil in the detail comes down here. And it means that when we talk about all the topics of resilience as we just mentioned, and we talk about risk and increased risk and whatnot, I think the best way to look at it is actually to say, okay, as an individual, then do you have more or fewer of the different risk factors that we know that exist? And if so, well, then actually treating one of them seems to really make a difference. But our resilience is all built upon, what kind of capacity are we born with? How much long of an education, how much have we used our brain during our development years? All of that is part of what also builds the resilience. And it's this kind of balance between the resilience that you build up and the risk factors that you encounter throughout life. And that's where we can just see that hearing loss plays a role here and can be tipping the scale depending on, how much resilience you have on the other side of it.
Right. It also underlines 2 really important things for me. One, that if we as individuals are educated and knowledgeable about our own risk factors, we can do something about it, and we can be empowered and proactive and possibly even preventative for our own futures, and build resilience, as you say. But also, it also underlines to me that it's a bit naive to think you can have a cookie cutter approach that's going to match everybody. We need to really look at each person as an individual and look at their holistic care. Because there might be different solutions or different nuances that are going to build more resilience with one person versus another. So yeah, exactly. Fascinating. So it's interesting. So all the research is showing these correlations,
Mm.
but it's now showing that this is something that we really need to take seriously going forward, and definitely throw out that paradigm of ears just as being mechanical. So yeah, it's kind of like a new frontier, isn't it? And going forward now.
I think it's incredibly exciting for what I would say both the entire industry, because we're learning more and more about like the value that we can bring to people, and the importance of what we do when we go to work every day.
Mm-hmm.
And also I think it's important to remember that the impact that it can have on an individual. So it definitely is a paradigm shift, and I think it it across the entire spectrum means that we, as you said, need to have very much an individual approach, but we can still have it standardized in the sense that maybe we just look a bit wider on the health, and then where we can see that there are reasons to deep dive for an individual and for a patient, then that's an option.
I think this is a great segue to lead into BrainWorks then. So I would imagine that these were the cornerstones of the foundation of the beginnings of BrainWorks. But please tell me more about it. I'm really interested to learn.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, BrainWorks has it was basically founded by August of 2025. No, sorry. BrainWorks is from August of 2021. So it's 4.5 years or so from when it was started until now.
Right.
And I would say back then it was we could see that all the research was there, and it was like building, and as I said before, from 2011 there was a lot to begin with, but it was this like body of research that no one really seemed to have a good grasp on how we addressed in the industry. I feel like there was a first wave where some of this topic was used a little bit like a scare tactic, and that sort of created two different camps in the industry, where some were staying away from it entirely because of it being used as a scare tactic, and others were leaning into it because it was also a way to create urgency. And I mean, that could also be a topic that we can get back to.
Mm-hmm.
But what we wanted to do was, as a company, say, like, we can see that this topic is here to stay. We wanted to figure out how we could address it, get wiser on it, and how we could help expand on it. So we made sure that it was a dialogue we can have in a constructive way, in a way that we could inform, we could give people the active choice, and also, as you said yourself, we could empower them to actually make meaningful choices for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But where we started out was actually we thought, well, if it's something that we can, if it's something that affects people's health, we also want to be able to monitor it. So we thought very much on the technology end of it when we started, and we were interested to see what can we do here in this field. But we learned very quickly that it wasn't necessarily the right place and right time to do that, because it wasn't the body of research wasn't something that was, I would say, that widely talked about or that widely known, in the sense that, okay, what is it we actually know from research?
Mm-hmm.
So we realized that our effort and our focus was much better used if we went in and actually focused on making sure that we could spread that awareness, and that we could facilitate these good discussions based on true to fact, true to evidence, and that we would keep making sure that we could be a platform and a place to go where this research and this evidence was being portrayed in a way that made it actionable and insightful and tangible, I would say. And that was where we've born this movement called Listen to This out of the BrainWorks department, to really do that and do it as a joint voice with others from the industry.
Is Listen to This like a vehicle to educate the general public? Is that how you would describe it?
Not as it started. Mm-hmm. I think the way that we've looked at it has been that we are, there's two sides to a table in a consultation. You have like the professional, and you have your patient or the individual seeking care.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we looked at it was we wanted to make sure that we as an industry and as professionals would be up to date first and foremost. Partly because all these topics were starting to come up in mainstream media. Like you saw headlines on CNN, BBC sometimes, right? And it's something that still pops up once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And we're learning that, or we learned back then, that it wasn't always something that audiologists found obvious to address, or that it was easy to talk about. And sometimes it would just be trying to find a good way to shut down the conversation. Then you would move on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
So what we wanted there was to create a platform for HCPs, hearing care professionals, to get informed, so they would feel equipped and they would feel comfortable actually having these conversations, and also understand the again, the importance of what they do and how they can help their patients, and add that extra aspect to it. And I feel like over these years that we've gotten to a new point of that knowledge base is getting up there, not only because of us, but because I think the entire industry is moving ahead. But of course, I'd like to think we've played a small role in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a very good point too, that a lot of the early information that we got from the media, but also just in general, there was some fear mongering there, and it's it sits better with me, and I'm sure with many other professionals, to turn it around to be a lot more positive language as to what can we do about it to make a positive change for the future, instead of being, if you don't do anything, this is what's going to happen, so I'd much rather frame it that way. Okay, so so then the BrainWorks initiative. So you're speaking about Listen to This and educating healthcare professionals to have better, more standardized, more quality conversations to be able to then educate their customers. So how does BrainWorks fit then?
Well, I would say BrainWorks is the umbrella that we call ourselves within the company.
Okay.
And Listen to This is an outcome of some of the work we do. So I would say BrainWorks as a department and as a function, what we try to, I would say, pride ourselves in is to just make sure that we are as up to date as we can be. We make sure that we have all the latest research coming in, that we have a look at it, we pay attention to it, so we can be that resource that also supports movements like Listen to This, and we keep being that kind of authority on the topic. So within the company and also in the way that we look at ourselves in the industry, is we want to be sure that we are on top of hearing health. And we've actually gone from, now we talked a little bit about it in the beginning, but of course cognitive health, but branching out to all the different areas of health, just also realizing and acknowledging the fact that we need to look at the whole person, right? And that's what we want to be doing. And then Listen to This is very much the vehicle where we try to get it out there and do so with partners and do it above brand in a way that is not commercial or anything, but truly something that gives it a topic that belongs to everyone in the industry.
So it's interesting you're saying going beyond devices, hearing aids, essentially, and other assistive devices, but moving beyond devices to the outcome of the individual. And the thing that I quite like from what you said is it kind of is this nice bridge between all the research, the technology that's out there, and the care, so it's kind of making all this complex science and all these facts, it makes it more tangible, human, and actionable, really, so that because if people understand it, which is a good reason why we're having the podcast today, if people understand it and can access the information in a way that they can uptake, then it means that they can do something about it, right? So that's great. It's almost like translating it, right, into everyday actionable. Yeah, go ahead.
It is, and I think it's a great analogy, because what we are trying to, the different ways that we're trying to do so is, we have, of course, the articles on our website, like listentothis.com, where you can find a lot of this material. We've also created masterclasses, so you can actually go in, you can see the topic explained, and it goes into much more depth than I've just done here on the topic of hearing loss and cognition, but by some of the leading experts in the world on this topic. And among others, also Dr. Frank Lind, who was one of the first researchers to actually kickstart the entire, sort of paradigm shift. So we have, different levels, from articles to videos to actually also creating different resources and leaflets and flyers that gives you that chance of, here's the brief overview of what we know, and here's a leaflet to understand it better. Here are some of the benefits that you can gain from it.
Yeah.
And it's really our attempt at bringing it from something that is, like maybe some researchers will be a little bit not agree with me that much, but from the dusty sort of like world of science, where everything feels as if it's a little bit difficult to ascertain and understand, to something that's super approachable, easy to understand, but still doesn't overstate.
Yeah,
So that's really how we're trying to do it.
You're translating it basically, and catering to different kinds of people's learning styles, so some people pick up things auditorily, others prefer to see it visually. So that's great. And we will have access on our website and a link to jump to your website where our listeners can access these resources. So, the information is out there. That kind of moves me on to, how do these insights about hearing and cognition, like, how does it actually change what happens in a clinic, or how does it change to someone wearing hearing technology day by day?
It's a good question, and I think it's one that it's one of those answers where it depends.
Yeah, I agree.
But the longer version of my answer is that I think first and foremost how it has changed it is that the conversations are changing out in the clinics. I feel like when you also talk to patients sometimes, and just individuals who have a hearing loss, I don't always like to just say patients because I know it's putting them a little bit in a box, but individuals with a hearing loss, if they've gotten a hearing aid, well, a lot of people are actually like starting to become more aware of the topic, and also in a good way. So I think it is changing, and it means that our dialogues are becoming slightly different, and that I think is a great thing, because it means that we're also able to articulate the value, like not only being able to hear better, but also the longer term value, and people can make those decisions for themselves. Now, when I say that it depends, it's also because, of course, I think we can also do a lot more. I think that, the more we get informed, the better we understand it, and the better we are at bringing it up in a good way with our patients, the better the outcome. And I think that's also one of the areas that we're trying to focus on more, to figure out what are these good ways of bringing it up, because now we've gone from like BrainWorks in its infancy, like where knowledge was not as widespread as it is now, to people saying, yeah, well, it's all well and good, Sigart, we know about the topic, you don't need to tell us more about that, but I don't know how to bring it into my practice. And that's where I think we still have ways to go, because it's not necessarily an easy topic to bring up if people come in and they have a hearing loss and they're like, I'm coming to get hearing aids, and then, by the way, have you heard about cognition? There's a bridge between that needs to fit. But I think there's a good way of bringing it in, because at its core, it is something that we in our industry can actually address, because the issues that people come with, having hearing difficulties, speech and noise issues, is something that we can have a very real impact on people's, brain health.
Yeah.
For individuals themselves and how it changes, I think, if I can be honest with you, hopefully not that much. And what I mean by that is that I don't necessarily think that people should go home and worry that much more about their hearing loss when they've gotten a hearing aid fitted. Rather than, I would much rather actually get people to, if anything, just be happy about the fact that they're doing something good for themselves. Understand the I want to say the depth of like why it's something good for themselves. But after that, I wanted to basically fall in the background, because then that's where they need to just go out and live without being held back by the hearing loss. It needs to just work its magic in the background. That's hopefully where our help and our assistance can help people to get to.
I fully agree with you. I mean, I am a clinical audiologist, and I think that nuance and that sophistication of the conversation, I've been doing this 25 years, and of course the awareness wasn't around when I first did my training. So I would be the first to put my hand up and go, yes, please, more training into how to, as you said earlier, bridge that kind of gap and get people thinking more about their entire health. You also mentioned, go out there and live your life, and hopefully reduce the listening effort. You didn't use those exact words, but essentially, when you're in background noise, making it easier to hear means you're less fatigued. And again, from a personal perspective, I have a hearing loss. I wear hearing aids. I've worn them since high school. And you go back and forth between being that person that monopolizes the conversation, because if you're telling a story, you can kind of guess what people are going to say. Or as you said, if it's just too hard, you just lean back and you're kind of a wallflower and you sort of watch what's going on. So, by improving that and and making it easier just to have a quality conversation and interaction with people, which is really what it's all about, right? It's about humans connecting with other humans in a really meaningful way. Then it means at the end of the night, you're far more rewarded, and it's a much more enriching experience, right? For hopefully everybody. So it's
Yeah.
really important work. Yeah.
One thing, of course, is just what happens within the audiological clinic. But when I put on the glasses up, listen to this, and I look a little bit further out in the future, what I hope to do is also that we are reaching the adjacent health areas of the healthcare sector. Because if we start to learn how hearing loss is, connected to other areas of health, then hopefully that also means that people will start to pay more attention to hearing loss as part of health evaluations. So that could, for instance, be that if you get a yearly checkup with your GP or family doctor, then why not put hearing loss on that list? Alongside cholesterol and heart, blood pressure. It makes complete sense to me. And you could do some very quick screenings and see, like, okay, is there something? You can even just ask people, do you think you have a hearing loss, and encourage them to actually do something about it. But it could also mean that if you go out into the industries of neurology or those areas, then it also means that if you have someone coming in with subjective memory complaints, that as part of your assessment is that you would also check for people's hearing loss before you've done like a full neurological assessment of them. Because as you said, it's just not a mechanical thing. It's something that is connected to your brain. And we know, again, from research that the brain, physically changes if you have a hearing loss to the point where it starts to borrow resources from other parts of the brain. So it's also deeply neurological. So if you want to have assessments of memory problems, then check the hearing loss and make sure that if they have one, then you treat it. It's actually as actionable as that. And it means that the role that we can play within audiology is to actually play a lot more together with the rest of the healthcare system. That to me is part of the dream on how we would start to work much closer together and have that holistic view on how people would be treated in the help they can get.
No, I love that. I actually find that really inspirational. Yeah, that would be fantastic if just a hearing assessment, as you say, is just normalized mainstream. I mean, we see it now becoming more and more kind of every day in just tiny tidbits, like Apple with the AirPods now, as soon as you turn them on, they do a quick hearing screening. But it'd be great if just this sort of thing was just embedded in kind of everyday life everywhere. Just like, as you say, every time you go to the doctor, you have your blood pressure checked immediately. It's just kind of normally you don't even think about it. So it'd be lovely if hearing was, as everyday and accessible as that. Yeah, it'd be fantastic. Now you at BrainWorks, you've done some exploration in some fascinating areas. So I'm just going to kind of detour a little bit. So you've done some really cool digging into digital and voice-based biomarkers. So I'm just really interested, if you just want to touch on that for a second. Why is voice a powerful window into brain health?
Yeah, it's true. We've done some work within voice biomarkers, and I mean, it's just when I first started working with voice biomarkers, I was told this great analogy that I always stick to, and it was called sort of the mom test. And it's just like if you're a parent and let's say you have your kid that calls you, then it doesn't take you many split seconds to hear like something is off, and then the next question is like, are you sick?
Right.
So there's just so much information in the voice that intuitively we as humans can get. We understand, we react on it both on a conscious and subconscious level. And there are also cues that are, maybe not audible to the human ear, but if you start to couple it up with pattern recognition and whatnot, then it becomes a powerful tool to realize when things are changing, and you can start to do different data collections and see how it correlates to cognition and other conditions, respiratory and whatnot. And I think it's an incredibly interesting tool. We haven't done as much with it here lately, but it's something that I really hope to pick up again and work on.
I think it's fascinating, isn't it? It's like another window into cognition. Hey, so yeah. So you mentioned before about a shift in how we think about hearing care. So making it more personalized, thinking bigger and more holistically. If we zoom out and helicopter, big picture again for a second, what mindset shift do clinicians, the industry, and even patients or customers need to make when it comes to hearing and brain health, do you think? Or where have we started and where do you think you'd like it to go?
I think it's a really good question. I think right now where we are is that we have an acknowledgement that's taking place. And so we can see that there's all this evidence, there's always all this knowledge coming out. It's a very recurrent topic at different kinds of audiology conferences across the world, that now it's there, and it's always a topic on some level of hearing loss and health and cognition and whatnot. So I think that's the reason why, when I also mentioned earlier, like people telling me now they know, like, the next step is action. So I think what I would like to see in the beginning is like the further acknowledgement of saying it's okay to actually start to talk about this. So we need to find ways of bringing it into the clinic in a way that it relates to the core of our services that we provide. So that to me is just some of the immediate next steps. And maybe what I mean by that is to say, it very much it very quickly ends up being a discussion about whether or not it's like within scope or out of scope when it comes to the being an audiologist, being within the hearing business, and whether or not it should be a topic that you address. And I think that is a shift that's going to happen as well. That changes, that it's when you're within audiology, then you're within healthcare, and that the services that you provide are with the health aspect of it. And it's not because I think it's going to change fundamentally really anything about what we do and the service we provide, right? Because at the end of the day, with the evidence coming out, the benefit that you get is when you hear better, and that is at the core of what an audiologist can help you do, right? If you have a hearing loss, it's just a matter of translating why it matters to hear better and why people should do something about it, where you get your leads from, and how you sort of interact with your patients in that sense. So it doesn't need to be a scary topic if you feel comfortable in the knowledge that we have and how we can communicate it. So that's hopefully one of the next steps that are coming here. And I could see that if you look out into the future, and I know that a lot of, like, for instance, yourself at Resonate, some of the approaches that you have that are maybe a little bit more holistic could also be an approach that gets adopted by more clinics, where we allow ourselves to spend a bit more time on getting that full picture of your patient, to understand people's health issues, maybe individualize it a little bit more, maybe primarily on some of the counseling, maybe collaborating a bit more with, let's say, the GP that sent the person to you for hearing loss. Maybe they come in for the checkup 3 years later and you realize you need to refer back to the GP, right? Like being able to see those subtle cues and make sure that we have a care value chain that exists, where we can be part of a greater network to make sure that our patients are being treated as best as possible across their holistic health, and that we have that aspect of looking into how we can help treat our patients. I would imagine that it's going in that direction, while the core of the services that we provide are very much the same. Yeah, and maybe that was a little bit of a tangent, but
no, I love that, and I love that term, care value, and care value chain, and I like the analogy that, of course, a chain is all interlinked, and that's very much how I see it. That with customer or client centered care, they're at the center, and around them you might have the health professionals, but you also have their environment, their family, their whānau, their greater environment. So we do need to think more. And I love also what you said about we've acknowledged the mindset shift. We've accepted this new information, and it's how do we action this going forward in a way that's really going to benefit the people that we serve. So that's it's exciting. Like I said before, it's a new frontier. So it's very exciting, I think, to look at the entire person holistically and take these next step forward.
If we're going to dream just a little bit further from this, right? It's also to say, like, I think we're starting to see different waves of now, when I say younger generations, maybe that's not even true, but people in their millennials or Gen X's as well, right? They're starting to be more health conscious, doing more things, where they focus on working out or doing different with devices like a smartwatch or a Whoop band or other ways of knowing if you're recovered. It's becoming one of the really, really big health trends. And where I think it could be interesting to look at hearing in a good amount of years from now, maybe 10 years from now, is that it becomes more like an area of biohacking or becomes more an area of self-optimization. That is like, why wouldn't you help yourself hear better so you're like, working even better with the environment around you, rather than seeing it as something that's a disability, then it's actually the opposite. I can see that starting to happen. And I think there are already some that are starting to look at treating your hearing also because it's just convenient. If you don't have to find your earbuds anymore, then you can just take that call on your hearing aids, or you can just listen to music and whatnot, right?
Yes.
Then suddenly it becomes this enabler that gives you more options rather than this that you feel like you're succumbing to having to get a hearing aid. That to me is an interesting future that we could look into. And I really do think that the demographic that will be seeking out the hearing aid would also be perhaps both younger, but also come in with a different mindset. But all that, of course, depends on how we're able to describe why people should go in and do it, right? And the service that we do and the self-perception of our industry.
And I think self-perception is key in that, because I reckon the term hearing loss is outdated, and it is inherently a bit negative, right? Because it's implying that you're missing something. Whereas I grew up in the capital D deaf culture, where if you are completely deaf, there is nothing wrong with you, and it is very interesting because we are seeing more and more people beyond the audiogram or the graph of your hearing. You might have more people with normal hearing or very, very slight hearing problems, but they're saying the same things. I'm still struggling in noise. I'm still finding it hard to pay attention when there's lots of other things going on. I can hear people, but I struggle to understand them. So there's the reasons people are motivated to do something about their hearing. 100% agree with you. It's a whole kaleidoscope of different motivators, I suppose. I really like that. I like because it's positive framing, and it's proactive, not sort of reactive. You're not sort of waiting until there's a problem to do something about it. I kind of like, there's lots of different reasons to take action, and why not be a superhuman if you can, or at least be your most optimized self, right? Yeah. Love that. Okay, so at Resonate, we talk a lot about hearing as the foundation, but it's not the be all and end all. So it's like the foundation, the starting point of your care. If listeners take away just one idea from this conversation, what would you hope that should be?
First and foremost, I think it matters to take care of your hearing. That I think is the first one. And when I mean take care of your hearing, yes, of course, if you do have a hearing loss or otherwise, feel like that it's difficult to manage hearing in certain situations, it matters to do something about it, but it also matters to protect it. And it's the little things, right? Like I personally also, after being in the hearing industry, if I go to a concert, I feel kind of naked if I don't have some kind of earplug in, because it's like, I know I shouldn't be doing this. I don't want a hearing loss because I know what it means. And so it's just take care of it, but don't be scared of it, because there are so many good things you can do about it. There are strategies in terms of hearing better. There are devices that can help you in the situations that really struggle. And we're getting very good at doing those things. And I would say it's also, I hope as a second message that everything that relates to the stigma and whatnot falls in the background, because it's been something that we constantly end up going back to when we talk about it in the industry and whatnot. But I think it's just something we need to make sure, or we need to be careful that we don't unnecessarily focus on it in a way that it actually becomes a bigger thing that it needs to be. And if we start to look at doing something about your hearing loss in the greater aspect or perspective of your health, then I do believe that the hesitation becomes less. And it's actually now, like, just quick tangent. AARP in the US had this survey where they found that 71% would be extremely likely or very likely to act on their hearing loss if they knew that it was relating to these different aspects of your health. So I do believe that it's something that really can move mountains in getting people to do something about their hearing loss. And for that, I hope that people will realize that hearing better matters, and also making sure that you hear better is something that matters long term.
Yeah, that will help to reduce stigma over time as well, because just like glasses, right? The more people that are out there wearing glasses, hearing aids, whatever it might be, it's just more normal. And the more conversations we have like this, the more accessible and less behind closed doors. And, it doesn't have that sort of secretive, don't talk about it sort of feel. It can be nothing but positive, I reckon. Yeah.
No, exactly. And it's and I feel like I really want to put an emphasis on the idea of why I think it's a positive message. I mean, I briefly just mentioned it a little bit earlier here with the research saying that if you have a hearing loss, the brain actually physically changes some of its structure. The same body of research actually showed that if you use the hearing aid for 6 months, the brain actually reversed those changes back to normal.
Wow.
So
6 months.
That message is also like it still matters. It's something that when you do something about it and you go in and actually treat your hearing loss, it brings the brain back to normal processing. And so it means it's never too late either to do something about it also.
I love that it's never too late. That's fascinating. So, okay, so let's just unpick that just a tiny bit. So if you had a hearing problem and you didn't do anything about it, and you've got, again, going back to my bucket of resources that you wake up with in the morning.
Yeah.
Am I right in assuming, just layman's terms, that if I'm really focusing on someone that I'm trying to talk to in a challenging environment, that I will be using different parts of my brain to try to understand that message? I might be using maybe my frontal lobe to decode and figure it out. I might be using my visual part of my cortex to watch what they're saying and their body language, and less my auditory cortex where I actually hear the sound. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so this specific study that I'm thinking about is actually, it was done by a researcher called Dr. Hannah Glick and Dr. Anu Sharma out of Colorado Boulder back then. Then it showed that if you had a hearing loss, they tested both with MRI and EEG, and they could show that the activity in the temporal lobe changed. So if you had a hearing loss, then when you listened, the activity was less in the temporal lobe. But if you had like a visual cue, like people looking at a screen, then the areas that was normally associated with hearing would actually light up, showing that your vision sense started to take over the area of your brain that actually had to do with hearing.
Right.
And some of what they hypothesized there was that it would, for that exact that you said, maybe you start to lip read, or you start to use other senses to connect with the world around you. And naturally, if your normal processing involves that you need to spend some of those resources to listen, it's closely connected to your memory and cognition, because you also need to understand what's being said. Well, if you start to rewire some of those areas, then it's going to, of course, also affect these adjacent areas.
Of course.
Then they used a hearing aid for 6 months, and what they could then show was that the allocation of brain resources would then reverse back to similar of what they would have within a normal hearing group.
Right. Wow.
Now it's a smaller sample in the study, in the sense that I believe it was 21 individuals. So of course it's also an area that is interesting to explore more.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it actually also corroborates a lot of the different knowledge that we have, and how we can see that listening effort actually really challenges us, and that increases those extra efforts, and how you need to adapt when you start using a hearing aid, that it takes some time for you to actually feel like you can hear normally again.
Mm-hmm.
All of that you can potentially actually explain with somehow the brain changes its processing when you have a hearing loss.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that, of course, can happen over many, many years, because a hearing loss is gradual, right? So to me, that is one of the very interesting pieces of research within this topic that could potentially explain, some of the associations and correlations that we're seeing, and could be an explanation model for why we also saw the 48% reduction in decline in individuals that were at increased risk, because we can actually bring this processing back to normal.
Fascinating. And I love the take-home message that it's never too late. And our brains are amazing things, hey, that they're so plastic and malleable and flexible, that that they can learn to rewire or go back to their original wiring, or just it's really, really quite. We're humans, hey, we're amazing creatures.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I would say I invite everyone who's interested in learning more also to have a look at what we're doing at listentothis.com. And I can give a little bit of a sneak peek with the listeners here that we're also looking to actually do some communication to end users and help that side of, the other side of the consultation table to also now start to understand this topic better, and to start bringing out some resources that would help facilitate these understandings, the conversations you might have with a loved one that has a hearing loss, because we think now it's also time to help that knowledge pool to improve and hopefully continue the positive change in getting people to want to act and feel like that they can do those good things for themselves and do something about their hearing loss.
Yeah, I think the more we can do that and help. How many times have you gone to the doctor and you get home and your partner's like, what did they say? And so the more we can help enable people to relay the information again, secondhand, third hand, without losing the essence of it, I think, can be really, really helpful. So I think resources like that to help, the average person to express those concepts to other people is it's going to be nothing but helpful. Yeah, it's fantastic. I just wanted to thank you for helping us connect those dots, between hearing and brain health in a way that feels really hopeful and practical, but also grounded in science. So it's not an easy thing to do. So I wanted to thank you for that. And for our listeners out there, this conversation essentially, it sits right at the heart of what this podcast is about. It's about understanding how hearing influences how we think, how we live, and how we connect with others. So I just wanted to thank you very much for that. And for our listeners, if you wanted access to any of these resources, please jump on our website. The link will be at the bottom of the screen, resonatehealth.co.nz/podcast. And you'll find links to all of these resources and to listen to this and all the science articles as well. And you can learn more about Sigart and all the exciting work that he's doing. You can also, on that same website, listen to other podcasts, but there is a free link to a comprehensive guide to hearing that tells the story right from the start to the finish, all about hearing, cognition, different devices, different technologies, and counseling techniques. So you can download the free PDF, or you can order an actual hard copy to be mailed out to you. If this conversation has resonated with you, if anything you've learned today is of interest, carry this conversation forward, talk about it with your friends and loved ones. Please share anything that you think is useful and helpful. And I want to thank you today for joining us. And I hope you and the listeners join us again for our next episode at Resonate the Podcast. I'm your host, Lesleigh Smith, and I'll see you next time.